Today, we're going to look at a really surprising idea about surprise. As it turns out, predictable punchlines might actually be funnier than unpredictable ones. So let me ask you this. Have you ever watched any cat fail compilations? You know the drill. A bunch of clips of cats doing silly things, falling off tables, missing jumps, whatever the hell this is. Oh, so let me ask you this. Why are cat fail videos funny at all? I mean, you're literally clicking on a video that promises to show you a cat failing, and then you laugh when the cat fails. The title of the video is literally telling you what the surprise is going to be. And yet, these videos are shared by millions of people because they find them so funny. As it turns out, the answer has something to do with anticipatory pleasure. And it might just teach us why a predictable punchline can be funnier than an unpredictable one. So if that sounds good, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe for future videos. And let's get into this one. Now here is a great example of a joke that is both predictable and hilarious at the same time. In this joke by Demetri Martin, he literally tells you what the punchline is going to be inside of the setup. And even though it is very predictable, it's still hilarious.
If you want to sound like a creep, just add the word ladies to the end of things that you say. You could be saying something harmless too, like, thanks for coming to the show. Ladies. Help, I've fallen into a well, and I'm trapped. Ladies.
Now, if you had paused the video just before Demetri Martin hit his punchline, it would have been incredibly easy for you to guess what the punchline was going to be. And yet, it is still incredibly funny. Now, conventional wisdom would say that this is all wrong, because if you want to hide the punchline for as long as possible, then you certainly shouldn't be giving hints inside of your setup about what the punchline is going to be. Using unpredictable punchlines has been seen as this unbreakable rule of comedy, but there's this new scientific research that suggests that that might not actually be the case. To begin, let's look at what conventional wisdom has to say. Early research into the nature of humor seemed to suggest what everybody already knew is true. Surprising punchlines make for funnier jokes. Now, this is known as the surprise hypothesis. And it suggests that jokes become funnier as the punchline becomes more surprising or more unpredictable. However, there's new research out there that suggests that this might not actually be the case, and that predictable punchlines can actually be funnier than unpredictable ones. Now, I know this sounds counterintuitive, but if you dig a little deeper, things start to make sense. So how do we know how surprising a joke is in the first place? In one study by Dr. Kenny, participants were split into two groups and they were given the same jokes. Group 1 was asked to rate how funny each joke was, and Group 2 was asked to rate how surprising or predictable the joke was. They categorized the surprise into high, medium, and low. From there, the researchers could take this data and figure out, of the jokes that were rated the funniest, how many of them were rated as very surprising, or medium surprise, or low surprise. As it turns out, the jokes that were rated the funniest tended to have the lowest surprise. The second funniest group were those jokes that were rated as a medium surprise. And so the lowest performing group, the group of jokes that people thought were the least funny, were actually the most surprising. In a follow-up study, instead of asking participants to subjectively rate how surprising a joke was, researchers took a joke and they edited out the punchline. And then they asked those participants to guess what the punchline was going to be. So the jokes in which most of the people could successfully guess the punchline, we know that those jokes are very predictable, or else they couldn't have predicted what the punchline would be. And so this gave us a really good way of measuring the predictability of a punchline. So once again, we did the same thing. Which jokes are the funniest goes to Group 1, and Group 2 says, which jokes can we actually predict? So here's a good example of how this works. Here's a joke by Victor Borge. Once my father came home and found me in front of a roaring fire. That made my father very mad, as we didn't have. So I'm not going to ruin the answer for you here. Feel free to think about it for a moment, and then you can go down to the comment section and see if anybody has posted the correct answer there. So if everybody can guess what the punchline is going to be, then we know that the punchline is very predictable. And this gives us a very reliable way of both measuring the humor inside of a joke as well as the predictability of that punchline. So when you put the data together, we get exactly the same picture. We see that the jokes with the most predictable punchlines end up being funnier than the ones with the unpredictable punchlines. So why are predictable punchlines so funny? Well, humor researchers suggest that it's due to a psychological phenomena called priming. And this is when the audience is getting ready to start laughing. They haven't heard the punchline yet, but they're anticipating it and they're getting ready to laugh. Now, what you see a lot of storyteller comedians do is that they purposely give these hints inside of the setup about what the punchline is going to be. Now, conventional comedy wisdom would say that this is completely wrong, because if you want your punchline to be really surprising, then you definitely shouldn't be giving the audience any hints about what the surprise is going to be. Storyteller comedians are able to get around this because they're able to give the audience a hint about what kind of punchline to expect without giving them too much information that the audience would be able to head off the surprise and kill the humor. And this lets the audience anticipate something funny and prepare to start laughing, but it doesn't actually ruin the surprise. So let's take this Jon Stewart example. In this bit, Jon Stewart purposefully hints at what the punchline is going to be, but the hint is too generic for the audience to jump ahead of the punchline and then ruin the surprise. So here, he tells the audience that George Bush really wants to bomb Iraq, and that he's looking for any excuse to do it. So as an audience member, we can anticipate a punchline that is going to be some kind of excuse to bomb Iraq. Now that's a very generic hint, but that's also why it's so important. It's generic enough to where you know what to look for as an audience member, but it's not so specific that it's going to ruin the joke.
The opinion, well, he wants to bomb Iraq so bad, he can just taste it. He so much wanted them not to comply with the resolution. He's searching for any reason to bomb Iraq. Gotta comply. Gotta comply with the resolutions, won't stand for it. Saddam Hussein's gotta comply with the resolutions. Okay, we comply. Gotta shave the mustache, gotta facial hair bad.
Now what I find so fascinating about this type of joke is that if you were to take out the hint from the setup, if Jon Stewart hadn't said anything about George Bush wanting to bomb Iraq, then once he hits that punchline of, you gotta shave the mustache, then it wouldn't make any sense, right? The joke, it wouldn't just be less funny, it would not be funny at all. It would literally break this joke. Now here's another great example of a storyteller giving a hint inside of the setup. In this bit, Brian Regan tells the audience that he wants to call an ambulance for himself, but it feels really weird. Now this allows the audience to start anticipating a punchline that's going to be weird. However, it's not specific enough where, as an audience member, we could guess what the actual punchline is going to be. So the surprise is still there.
I had some stomach virus thing. I almost called an ambulance. That's weird, even considering calling an ambulance for yourself. You know? You call ambulances for other people, right? What are you supposed to say about yourself? Can you come get me? Yeah, I don't feel so good. Just come on in, I'll be lying on the floor.
So in this joke, the audience can anticipate a weird punchline, even though they don't know specifically what that weird punchline is going to be. So what benefits do comedians get from using this? Well, there's several, but I want to focus on just two. Now this is going to seem really counterintuitive, but a predictable punchline can actually feel more surprising than an unpredictable one. So here's why. When we're talking about how surprising a joke is, we don't actually care about the setup. The setup can be long or short. The surprise doesn't really depend on how long the setup is. When we're talking about how surprising a joke is, what we really care about is the time between when you hit your punchline and the moment the audience fully comprehends your joke. So if you hit a punchline and it takes the audience member a half of a second to comprehend your joke, then we can say that that joke is twice as surprising as a joke in which it took the audience member a full second to understand your joke. So this is why priming is so effective. When you drop hints inside of your joke, then it makes it incredibly easy for the audience to fully comprehend your joke right after they hear the punchline. So you're basically allowing the audience to do some of the work of comprehension before you've actually hit the punchline. So when you do hit that punchline, most of the work is already finished, which is why the joke can feel so surprising. When I know that a punchline is coming that is going to be weird, then I can start preparing myself for that weird punchline. And then once the comedian hits that punchline, most of the work is already done, which is why it's so quick for me to hear the final punchline and then jump straight to understanding the joke and laughing. The second benefit of using this priming technique is that it actually makes your punchlines hit harder. If you use your setup to tell the audience that a situation was really weird, then that is a great way of building up comedic tension. And the more the audience can anticipate this punchline, the more tension there's going to be, which ultimately means that there's a bigger laugh when the audience releases that tension. But when the punchline is completely unpredictable, then there's simply no way for an audience member to start anticipating anything. In my book, Playfully Inappropriate, I break all jokes down into two different categories. There's joke telling structure and there's storytelling structure. Joke telling relies almost exclusively on surprise and unpredictability. A great example is a broken assumption joke. These types of jokes get their power from being unpredictable. However, storytelling comedians don't require this unpredictable punchline to work. And in fact, they actually become funnier when the audience gets these hints inside of the setup. So think about it this way. A conventional joke gets its humor by surprising the audience about what happened, while storytelling jokes get their humor from how it happened. Now, this is why so many storyteller comedians can drop hints inside of the setup. They're priming the audience to laugh at the specific way that something happened. When Brian Regan tells you he had a weird experience, he's telling you what happened. He's tipping his hand about the surprise. But that's okay because the humor comes in how it happened. So now I want to hear from you. Can you think of any examples from storytelling or from one-liner comedians in which there is a hint inside of the setup? If you can, leave a comment below because I love checking out these examples for myself. And if you're interested in learning more about comedic storytelling, you can check out my book, Playfully Inappropriate, or you can go to onlinecomedytraining.com to download the Punchline Creation Formula, which gives you an easy 4-step method for creating a wide variety of jokes in any situation. So I'm Jared Voley. Make sure you leave a like and subscribe for future videos, and I will see you in the next one.